Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents How to Read Literature Like a Professor for Kids by Thomas E. Foster, narrated by David DeVries. Introduction. How'd he do that? Mr. Lindner? That wimp? Right, Mr. Lindner, the wimp. So what did you think the devil would look like? If he were red, with a tail, horns, and cloven hooves, any fool would know to turn down his offer. The class and I are discussing Lorraine Hansberry's play A Raisin in the Sun, 1959. The confused questions arise when I suggest that Mr. Lindner is the devil. The Youngers, an African-American family in Chicago, have made a down payment on a house in an all-white neighborhood. Mr. Lindner, a meek little man, has come to visit with a check in hand. He, along with all the neighbors, wants the family to take the check and move right back out again. At first, Walter Lee Younger confidently turns down the offer. He believes that the family's money, a life insurance payment they received after the death of Walter's father, is secure. But shortly after sending Mr. Lindner away, he discovers that 2/3 of that money has been stolen. All of a sudden, Mr. Lindner's insulting offer comes to look like the family's salvation. Bargains with the devil go a long way back. Most take the form of the Faust legend. In this old story, the devil offers Faust a life of pleasure, riches, and power in return for his soul. Faust accepts happily, enjoys his good times, and then repents too late as the devil drags his dying soul to hell. It's a story that's retold often. Each time, the hero is offered something he desperately wants: power or knowledge or a fastball that will beat the Yankees, and all he has to give up is his soul. In Hansberry's version, when Mr. Lindner makes his offer, he doesn't mention Walter Lee's soul. He doesn't even know that he is demanding it. He is, though. Walter Lee can be rescued from his family's crisis. All he has to do is to admit that he's not equal to his new white neighbors, that his pride and self-respect, his identity, can be bought. If that's not selling your soul, what is? But Walter Lee resists the devil's temptation. He looks at himself and at the true cost of the bargain and recovers in time to reject the devil's, Mr. Lindner's, offer. Walter Lee grows into a hero as he wrestles with his own demons as well as with the one who comes to visit with a check, and he comes through without falling. His soul is still his own. Something always happens in this conversation between professor and students. Each of us gets a look on our faces. My look says, "What, you don't get it?" Theirs says, "We don't get it, and we think you're making it up." Basically, we've all read the same story, but we haven't used the same tools to analyze it. It might seem as if the teacher is inventing a way to interpret the story out of thin air. Actually, the teacher just has some more experience, and the teacher has gathered over the years a kind of grammar of literature. That's a certain set of patterns, codes, and rules that we can learn to use when we're reading a piece of writing. Stories and novels have a very large set of conventions, or rules, or things that you can learn to expect: types of characters, plot rhythms, chapter structures, points of view. Poems have a great many conventions of their own, plays too, and there are certain conventions that show up in all three. Spring usually means the same thing, whether it's mentioned in a poem or a play or a novel. So does snow, so does darkness. So does sleep. Whenever spring is mentioned, we all start to think of the same ideas: youth, promise, young lambs, children skipping, on and on. And if we keep thinking, we might get to other concepts like new birth, new life, renewal. Okay, let's say you're right, and there is a set of conventions, like a key to reading literature. How do I get so I can recognize these? Same way you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice. When readers first read a piece of fiction, they focus on the story and the characters. Who are these people? What are they doing? And what wonderful or terrible things are happening to them? They will respond emotionally with joy or horror, laughter or tears, anxiety or delight. This is what every author hopes for. But when an English teacher reads, though he will respond emotionally as well, a lot of his attention will also be fixed on other things. It will be asking other questions. Where did that joy or grief or anxiety come from? Does this character seem like any others I've read about? Where have I seen this situation before? If you learn to ask these questions, you'll read and understand literature in a new light, and it will become even more rewarding and fun. Chapter 1. Every trip is a quest, except when it's not. Okay, so here's the deal. Let's say you're reading a book about an average 16-year-old kid in the summer of 1968. The kid, let's call him Kip Smith, who hopes his acne clears up before he gets drafted, is on his way to the A&P to get a loaf of bread. His bike is a 1-speed with a coaster brake, and therefore very embarrassing to ride, and riding it to run an errand for his mother makes it worse. Along the way, he has a couple of disturbing experiences, including an unpleasant encounter with a German Shepherd. And it's all topped off in the supermarket parking lot when he sees the girl of his dreams, Karen, laughing and fooling around in Tony Vauxhall's brand-new car, a Barracuda. Now, Kip hates Tony already because he's got a name like Vauxhall and not Smith, and because the Barracuda is bright green and goes approximately the speed of light, and also because Tony has never had to work a day in his life. Karen, who is laughing and having a great time, turns and sees Kip, who asked her out not so long ago. And she keeps laughing. Kip goes on into the store to buy a loaf of Wonder Bread that his mother told him to pick up. As he reaches for the bread, he decides right then and there to lie about his age to the Marine recruiter, even though it means going to Vietnam, because nothing will ever happen to him if he stays in this one-horse town where the only thing that matters is how much money your father has. What just happened here? If you were an English teacher, and not even a particularly weird English teacher, you'd know that you just watched a knight have an encounter with his enemy. In other words, a quest just happened. But it just looked like a trip to the store for some white bread. True, but think about it. What is a quest made of? A knight, a dangerous road, a holy grail, at least one dragon, one evil knight, one princess. Sounds about right. That's a list I can live with. We've got a knight named Kip, a dangerous road, nasty German Shepherd, a holy grail, a loaf of Wonder Bread, at least one dragon. Trust me, a 68 Barracuda could definitely breathe fire. One evil knight, Tony, one princess, Karen. Seems like a bit of a stretch. At first, sure, but let's think about what a quest is made of. It needs 5 things. 1, a quester. 2, a place to go. 3, a stated reason to go there. 4, challenges and trials along the way. 5, a real reason to go there. Item 1 is easy. A quester is just a person who goes on a quest, whether or not he knows it's a quest. In fact, he usually doesn't know. Items 2 and 3 go together. Someone tells our main character, our hero, to go somewhere and do something. Go in search of the Holy Grail. Go to the store for some bread. Go to Mount Doom and throw in a ring. Go there, do that. Now remember that I said the stated reason for the quest. That's because of item 5. The real reason for the quest is never the same as the stated reason. In fact, more often than not, the quester fails at the stated task. Frodo makes it all the way to Mount Doom, but does he throw the ring in the fire? No, he does not. Really, go read it again if you don't believe me. So why do heroes go on these quests? And why do we care? They go because of the stated task, believing that it is their real mission. We know, however, that their quest is educational. They don't know enough about the only subject that really matters, themselves. The real reason for a quest is always self-knowledge. Frodo may have saved the world from Sauron, but that really just turned out to be a bit of luck. What his quest actually brings him is a new understanding of the value of mercy and who needs it. Gollum, Frodo himself, and probably everybody in Middle-earth. Or here's another example. You know the book, I'm sure. How the Grinch Stole Christmas, 1957. Wait a minute. The Grinch is on a quest? Sure. Here's the setup. 1. Our quester, a grumpy, cave-dwelling creature who's had it up to here with the noise, celebration, and general happiness of Christmas. 2. A place to go, from his mountaintop cave to the village of Whoville, far below. 3. A stated reason to go there, to steal every Christmas present, tree, and bit of decoration he can lay his hands on. 4. Challenges and trials, a risky sleigh trip down the mountain, considerable effort packing up the Christmas presents and trimmings, an encounter with a 2-year-old girl who puts all the Grinch's efforts in peril simply by asking a question, and a painfully difficult trip back up the mountain with an overloaded sleigh. 5. The real reason to go, to learn what Christmas actually means, to have his shriveled heart expand back to its proper size, or even bigger, and to find genuine happiness. Once you get the hang of it, you can see how the Grinch Stole Christmas follows the conventions of a quest tale. So does The Lord of the Rings, Huckleberry Finn, Star Wars, Holes, and most other stories of someone going somewhere and doing something, especially if the going and the doing weren't the protagonist's idea in the first place. A word of warning. If I sometimes speak here and in the chapters to come as if a certain statement is always true, I apologize. Always and never are not words that have much meaning when it comes to literature. For one thing, as soon as something seems to always be true, some wise guy will come along and write something to prove that it's not. Let's think about journeys. Sometimes the quest fails or is not taken up by the protagonist. And is every trip really a quest? It depends. Some days I just drive to work. No adventures, no growth. I'm sure that the same is true in writing. Sometimes plot requires that a writer get a character from home to work and back again, but still, when a character hits the road, we should start to pay attention, just to see if, something's going on there. Once you figure out quests, the rest is easy. Chapter 2. Nice to eat with you. Acts of Communion. Sometimes a meal is just a meal. Characters in books can get hungry just like people outside of books. More often, though, it's not. In books, whenever people eat or drink together, it's communion. Communion has for many readers one and only one meaning. While that meaning is very important, it is not the only one. Nor does Christianity have a lock on the practice. Nearly every religion has some kind of ritual where the faithful come together to share nourishment. But not all communions are holy. In books, there are quite a few kinds of communion. Here's the thing to remember about communions of all kinds. In the real world, breaking bread together is an act of sharing and peace, since if you're breaking bread, you're generally not breaking heads. You usually invite your friends to dinner, not your enemies. In fact, we're quite particular about who we eat with. Generally, eating with someone is a way of saying, I'm with you, I like you, we form a community together. And that is a kind of communion. So it is in literature. And in literature, there is another reason. Writing a meal scene is so difficult, and basically so dull. What can you say about fried chicken that hasn't already been said? That there really needs to be some very important reason to include one in the story. And that reason has to do with how the characters are getting along, or not getting along. How about the main character, who doesn't even have a name, of Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham, 1960? He doesn't want to eat green eggs and ham, not even to try them. And he doesn't want to listen to the little creature named Sam coaxing and begging and nagging him to take just one bite. In fact, he wants Sam to go away. "You let me be," he orders Sam. But when he finally does give in and try, he likes green eggs and ham. And he even likes Sam. He eats and he gains a friend. Communion at its simplest. Sometimes just meaning or planning to share some food is all that the story needs. You don't actually have to see the characters taking a single bite. Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, 1964, is all about eating, even though it starts out as one of the hungriest books out there. Charlie and his family live on bread, potatoes, and cabbage, and not enough of any of it. They are slowly starving. There is love in this downtrodden family, though, and the person poor little Charlie loves the most is his Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe gives Charlie all the money he has in the world, a dime. Charlie uses the dime to buy, what else? A chocolate bar. And Charlie and Grandpa Joe share the experience of hesitantly, almost fearfully, peeling off the wrapper to see if, underneath, they will find the golden ticket that will let them into Willy Wonka's fabulous chocolate factory. They don't find it, they find only a chocolate bar. And they both burst out laughing. They don't have to take a bite of the candy for readers to see what these two characters share. They share the sense of fun, of excitement, and of possibility that is a part of childhood. They share laughter. They share hope. Their communion over the bar of Willy Wonka's chocolate brings them closer than ever, and the old man and the little boy spend the rest of the book at each other's side. What about when characters don't eat together? What if a meal turns ugly or doesn't happen at all? There's a different outcome, but the same logic. If a tasty meal or snack or a delicious bar of chocolate suggests that good things will happen between the people who share it, then a meal that doesn't work out is a bad sign. It happens all the time on television shows. Two people are at dinner and a third comes up, and one or both of the first two refuse to eat. They place their napkins on their plates or say something about having lost their appetites and walk away. Immediately we know what they think about the intruder. Consider another book about chocolate, Robert Cormier's The Chocolate War, 1974. Well, the title says the book is about chocolate. Actually, the book is about bullying and corruption and power. About what it takes and what it costs to stand up to people with power. Jerry Renault defies the students who control his school by refusing to sell chocolates for a fundraiser, and he is destroyed for that choice. No one supports him. He's on his own. Nobody eats either. In an entire book about chocolate, nobody tastes one mouthful. There is no eating, there is no communion, and there is no help for Jerry. If anybody had ever cracked open a box of those fundraiser chocolates and taken a bite, the poor kid might have had a chance. Chapter 3. Nice to Eat You. Acts of Vampires. What a difference one little word makes. If you take the with out of nice to eat with you, it begins to mean something quite different. Less wholesome, more creepy. It just goes to show that not all eating that happens in literature is friendly. Not only that, it doesn't even always look like eating. Beyond here, there be monsters. Vampires in literature, you say? Big deal. I've read Twilight, Dracula, Anne Rice. Good for you. Everyone deserves a good scare, or a good swoon. But actual vampires are only the beginning. Not only that, they're not even necessarily the most alarming. After all, you can at least recognize a vampire who has fangs. Let's start with Dracula himself. You know how in all those Dracula movies, or almost all, the Count has this weird attractiveness to him? Sometimes he's downright sexy. Always, he's dangerous, mysterious, and he tends to focus on beautiful unmarried women. And when he gets them, he grows younger, more alive, if we can say this of the undead. Meanwhile, his victims become like him and begin to seek out their own victims. Now let's think about this for a moment. A nasty old man, attractive but evil, violates young women, leaves his mark on them, steals their innocence, and leaves them helpless followers in his sin. I think we'd be reasonable to conclude that the whole Count Dracula story is up to something more than merely scaring us out of our wits. In fact, we might conclude that it has something to do with sex. But what about vampires who never bite? You're right. Famously, Edward does not bite Bella. But the vampire hero of Stephenie Meyer's Twilight, 2005, is mysteriously and powerfully attractive, isn't he? Just like Dracula. And he wants to bite Bella, doesn't he? Just like Dracula. Edward may be different in his self-control, but not in his desire. He wants exactly what Dracula wants, the blood of an innocent young woman. A young woman whose bedroom he creeps into. A young woman he watches while she sleeps. So vampirism isn't about vampires? Oh, it is, but it's also about other things. Selfishness, exploitation, a refusal to accept that other people have the right to exist, just for starters. We'll come back to this list a little later on. This rule also applies to other scary favorites, such as ghosts or doppelgangers, ghost doubles or evil twins. Ghosts are always about something besides themselves. Think of the ghost of Hamlet's father, when he takes to appearing on the castle ramparts at midnight. He's not there simply to haunt his son. He's there to point out something seriously wrong in Denmark's royal household. What's wrong? Oh, just that the king's brother first murdered the king and then married his widow. Or consider Marley's ghost in A Christmas Carol, 1843, who is really a walking, clanking, moaning lesson in ethics for Scrooge. Or take Dr. Jekyll's other half. In The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886, Robert Louis Stevenson uses the hideous Mr. Hyde to show readers that even a respectable man has a dark side. Writers use ghosts, vampires, werewolves, and all manner of scary things to symbolize certain things about our everyday existence. Ghosts and vampires are never only about ghosts and vampires. Here's where it gets a little tricky, though. The ghosts and vampires don't always have to appear in visible form. Sometimes the really scary bloodsuckers are entirely human. Henry James has a famous story, Daisy Miller, 1878, in which there are no ghosts, there is no demonic possession. There's nothing more mysterious than a midnight jaunt to the Colosseum in Rome. Daisy is a young American woman who does as she pleases. She upsets the social customs of the rich Europeans she meets. Eventually, Daisy dies, apparently because she caught malaria on her trip to the Colosseum. But you know what actually kills her? Vampires. No, really, vampires. I know I told you there weren't any supernatural forces at work here, but you don't need fangs and a cape to be a vampire. Daisy wants the attention of a man named Winterbourne. Winterbourne and his aunt and their circle of friends watch Daisy and disapprove of her. But because of a hunger to disapprove of something, they never cut her loose entirely. Instead, they play with her, yearning to become one of them. At last, Winterbourne spots Daisy with a male friend at the Colosseum at night and pretends not to see her. Daisy says, "He cuts me dead." That should be clear enough for anybody. The important points of the vampire story are all here. There's an older man who represents corrupt, worn-out values. There's a fresh, innocent young woman. The woman loses her youth, energy, and virtue. The older man continues to live. The young woman dies. There are books, of course, where the ghost or vampire is just a cheap thrill without any particular meaning. But such works tend not to have much staying power in readers' minds. We're haunted only while we're reading. In the books that continue to haunt us, however, the figure of the vampire, the cannibal, the spook shows up again and again, whenever someone grows in strength by weakening someone else. That's what the vampire figure really comes down to, using other people to get what we want, denying someone else's right to live, placing our own desires, particularly our ugly ones, above the needs of someone else. My guess is that as long as people act in selfish ways, the vampire will be with us. Chapter 4. If it's square, it's a sonnet. Every now and then, I'll ask my students what kind of poem we're talking about, what form the poem uses. The first time, the answer will be sonnet. The next time, sonnet. Care to guess about the third? Very good. Basically, I figure the sonnet is the only poetic form most readers will ever need to know. It's very common, has been written in every time period since the English Renaissance, and is still popular today. After I tell the students the first time that the poem is a sonnet, someone asks me how I knew so fast. I tell them two things. First, that I read the poem before class, useful for someone in my position, or theirs, come to think of it. And second, that I counted the lines when I noticed the shape of the poem. It's square. The miracle of the sonnet, you see, is that it is 14 lines long and most lines have 10 syllables. And 10 syllables of English are about as long as 14 lines are high. Square. Okay, great. Who cares? I agree, up to a point. I think people who read poems should always read the poem first without even thinking about its form or its style. They should not begin by counting lines or looking at line endings to find the rhyme scheme. Just enjoy the experience. After you've had that first experience, though, one of the extra pleasures you can get is seeing how the poet worked that magic on you. There are many ways a poem can charm the reader. Choice of images, music of the language, idea content, wordplay, and form. You might think that a poem of a mere 14 lines is only capable of doing one thing, but you'd be wrong. A sonnet, in fact, has 2 units of meaning, and a shift takes place between the first and the second. These 2 units are closely related to the 2 parts of the sonnet, and it's the sonnet's form that creates those 2 parts. Most sonnets have one group of 8 lines and one of 6. You can have a Petrarchan sonnet, which has an octave, 8 lines, and a sestet, a group of 6, or a Shakespearean sonnet, which has 3 groups of 4 lines, 3 quatrains, and a couplet, 2 lines. But even there, the first 2 quatrains join up to make a group of 8 lines, and the last quatrain joins up with the couplet to make a group of 6. However it works, the basic pattern is 8 and 6. Let's look at an example. Christina Rossetti was a British poet of the late 1800s. This is her poem, An Echo from Willow Wood, about 1870. 2 gazed into a pool, he gazed and she, not hand in hand, yet heart in heart, I think, pale and reluctant on the water's brink, as on the brink of parting, which must be. Each eyed the other's aspect, she and he. Each felt one hungering heart leap up and sink. Each tasted bitterness, which both must drink, there on the brink of life's dividing sea. Lilies upon the surface, deep below, 2 wistful faces craving each for each, resolute and reluctant without speech. A sudden ripple made the faces flow, one moment joined to vanish out of reach. So those hearts joined, and were parted so. It's a terrific little poem in its own right, and a good poem for our purposes. For one thing, it has neither a thee nor a thou in sight, so we get rid of some of the confusion that older poetry slings at modern readers. Anyway, I like Christina Rossetti, and I think that more people should be able to fall in love with her. At first glance, the poem doesn't really look square. True, but it's close. So the first question is, how many sentences? Not lines, of which there are 14, but sentences. The answer is 3. Can you guess where one period falls? Right, end of line 8. The first 8 lines, the octave, carry one idea. In this case, it's 2 sentences of 4 lines each, which we call quatrains. This is pretty common. The last 6 lines, the sestet, carry another related idea. In the octave, Rossetti creates a still, unmoving picture of 2 lovers right before some kind of event. Everything in it points to how they are about to go away from each other. They are on the brink of parting which must be. And yet, with all this anxiety and fear, full of hungering and bitterness, their surface, like that of the water, is calm. Inside, their hearts may leap up and sink, yet they show nothing, since they don't even look at each other, but only at each other's reflection in the water. In the sestet, though, a puff of breeze creates a ripple and dissolves that carefully controlled image. The water which has brought them, or their reflections, together, now pulls them apart. What is possible in the octave, the separation of the lovers, becomes real in the sestet. Without making any extravagant claims, no, this is not the greatest sonnet ever written, we can say that An Echo from Willow Wood is an excellent example of its form. Rossetti tells a story of human longing and regret within the boundaries of 14 lines. The beauty of this poem lies in part in the tension between the small package and the large emotions it contains. We feel that the story is in danger of breaking out of its vessel, but of course it never does. The vessel, the sonnet form, actually becomes part of the meaning of the poem. And this is why form matters, and why teachers pay attention to it. It just might mean something. When a poet chooses to write a sonnet, instead of, say, something on the scope of John Milton's Paradise Lost, it's not because he or she is lazy. Short poems take far more time per line because everything has to be perfect than long ones. We owe it to poets, I think, to notice that they've gone to this trouble. And we owe it to ourselves to understand the nature of the thing we're reading. When you start to read a poem, then, look at the shape. Chapter 5. Now where have I seen him before? One of the many great things about being an English teacher is that you get to keep meeting old friends. For beginning readers, though, every story may seem new. Each book feels unconnected to any other book. It's like one of those pictures where you connect the dots. When I was a kid, I could never see the picture in a connect-the-dots drawing until I'd put in nearly every line. Other kids could look at a page full of dots and say, "Oh, that's an elephant." Me? I saw dots. Part of this is just how good you happen to be at seeing two-dimensional pictures, but a lot of it is practice. The more connect-the-dots drawings you do, the more likely you are to recognize the picture early on. Same with literature. Part of pattern recognition is talent, but a whole lot of it is practice. If you read enough and think enough about what you read, you'll begin to see patterns, things that happen again and again. It may pay to remember this. There's no such thing as a completely original work of literature. Once you know that, you can go looking for old friends and asking the question, "Now where have I seen him or her before?" Take Bod, the hero of Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book, 2008. Bod is very young, still in diapers when he's left an orphan. Accidentally, cheerfully in fact, he wanders into a haunted graveyard. He's too young to know that cemeteries, tombstones, and ghosts are supposed to be scary, so he's not scared. The ghosts see him for what he is, a child who needs a family. They give him one, they take him in. The graveyard becomes his home, and the graveyard's solitary brooding vampire becomes young Bod's guardian, carefully keeping him safe against all the perils of the outside world until he's old enough to face them on his own. Now forget all the details about graveyards, ghosts, and vampires and think of Bod as a type. A very young orphaned boy, all on his own in a scary and threatening place. A human boy taken in by a group of non-humans with a protective and mysterious guardian who is also not human. Have you met him before? You have if you know Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, 1894, where the human boy Mowgli is raised by wolves and watched over by a black panther. Put an orphan boy who needs a family in the jungle and you have The Jungle Book. Put him in a graveyard and you have The Graveyard Book. Even the book's title is a big clue. Neil Gaiman not only used Kipling's story on purpose, he wanted readers to know that's what he was doing. Which brings us to the big secret. There's only one story. There, I said it, and I can't very well take it back. There is only one story. Ever. One. It's always been going on, and it's everywhere around us, and every story you've ever read or heard of or watched is part of it. The 1001 Nights, Harry Potter, Jack and the Beanstalk, Romeo and Juliet, The Simpsons. To me, literature is something like a barrel of eels. When a writer creates a new eel, it wriggles its way into the barrel. It's a new eel, but it shares its eelness with all those other eels that are in the barrel or have ever been in the barrel. Now, if that doesn't put you off reading entirely, you know you're serious. But the point is this. Stories grow out of other stories. Poems out of other poems. Of course, poems can learn from plays, songs from novels. Sometimes the influence is direct and obvious, as it is with the Graveyard Book. Other times it's less direct and more subtle. Maybe a modern-day miser makes the reader think of Scrooge. A female character may remind us of Scarlett O'Hara, or Ophelia, or Pocahontas. After much practice of reading, you begin to notice these similarities. All this books look like other books is all well and good, but what does it mean for our reading? Excellent question. If we don't see the reference, the connection, then it means nothing, right? Which isn't bad. If you don't know the Jungle Book and you don't realize that Neil Gaiman was using it when he wrote the Graveyard Book, you can still enjoy the novel on its own. It's a fun story, it works, and it gives pleasure to its readers. From there, everything else that happens is a bonus. But if you do realize that the Graveyard Book refers to the Jungle Book, you get more. A small part of this is what I call the aha factor. It's the delight we feel at recognizing something familiar, something we've met before. Aha! Bod is Mowgli. We get it. That moment of pleasure, wonderful as it is not enough on its own. Once we notice a similarity, it leads us forward. We begin to draw comparisons and parallels between the two books. We begin to think about what it means that Bod is in a graveyard while Mowgli is in a jungle. We begin to think about wilderness and what it might mean. And we begin to think even more about the big point Kipling and Gaiman are both making. What does it say about people in general that a pack of wolves or a group of ghosts must take in a human baby and keep him safe? When home is a jungle or a graveyard, when animals or monsters become family, what does that mean about the people and communities that are supposed to create homes for Mowgli and for Bod? Well, what does it say? What does it mean? I'm not going to tell you, but the point is, once you realize that the Graveyard Book and the Jungle Book are connected, you can ask these questions in new ways, and you have new places to hunt for the answers. This conversation, back and forth between old books and new, is always going on. It makes the experience of reading books deeper and richer. The more we notice that the book we're reading is speaking to other books, the more similarities we begin to notice, and the more alive the text becomes. But what do we do if we don't see all these similarities? First of all, don't worry. If a story is no good, being based on Hamlet won't save it. The characters have to work as characters as themselves. Silas the vampire needs to be a great character, which he is, before we need to worry about his resemblance to Bagheera the Black Panther. If the story is good and the characters work, but you don't notice the ways it connects to an older book, then you've done nothing worse than read a good story with characters you will remember. If you begin to pick up on some of these connections, however, you'll find that your understanding of the novel becomes deeper and more meaningful. But we haven't read everything. Neither have I, nor has anyone. Young readers, of course, have a slightly harder time, which is why teachers are useful in pointing out things you might have missed or didn't know to look for. When I was a kid, I used to go mushroom hunting with my father. I would never see them, but he'd say, "There's a yellow sponge," or "There are a couple of black spikes." And because I knew they were there, my looking would become more focused. In a few moments, I would begin seeing them for myself. And once you begin seeing mushrooms, you can't stop. What an English teacher does is very similar. He tells you when you get near mushrooms. Once you know that, you can hunt for mushrooms on your own. Chapter 6. When in doubt, it's from Shakespeare. If you look at any literary period between the 18th and 21st centuries, you'll be amazed by how much Shakespeare you find. He's everywhere, in every form you can think of, and he's never the same. Every age and every writer reinvents its own Shakespeare. Woody Allen took A Midsummer Night's Dream and made it into his film A Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy. Naturally. The BBC series Masterpiece has redone Othello as the story of Black Police Commissioner John Othello, his lovely white wife Desi, and his friend Ben Jago, who resents the fact that he was not picked for promotion. If you know that Shakespeare's Othello is manipulated by his jealous friend Iago into murdering his wife Desdemona, then you won't be surprised if things go badly for John, Desi, and Ben as well. West Side Story, 1957, famously reworks Romeo and Juliet, about 1591 to 95, as two doomed lovers are parted by prejudice and violence. Romeo and Juliet also became a movie in the 1990s, featuring hip teen culture and automatic pistols. And that's a century or so after Tchaikovsky's ballet based on the same play. Then there is Sharon M. Draper's Romiette and Julio, 1999, about two teenagers falling deeply in love. But a dangerous local gang is firmly opposed to an African-American girl and a Latino boy dating each other, and soon Romiette and Julio's relationship and their lives are at risk. Hamlet comes out as a new film every couple of years, it seems. Tom Stoppard takes two minor characters from Hamlet and gives them an entire play of their own in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And the 1960s TV series Gilligan's Island even had an episode in which the characters put together a musical Hamlet. Now that's art. Those are just a few of the uses to which Shakespeare's plots and situations get put. But if that's all he amounted to, he'd only be a little different from any other immortal writer. But that's not all. You know what's great about reading Old Will? You keep stumbling across lines you've been hearing and reading all your life. Try these. To thine own self be true. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Get thee to a nunnery. A horse, my kingdom for a horse! Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. Oh, and lest I forget, to be or not to be, that is the question. Ever heard any of those? This week? Today? In my copy of Bartlett's Familiar Quotations, Shakespeare takes up 47 pages. My first guess is that you probably have not read most of the plays from which these quotations are taken. My second guess is that you knew at least some of the phrases anyway. All right, so Shakespeare is always with us. What does that mean? He means something to us as readers, in part because he means so much to our writers. So let's consider why writers turn to our man. It makes them sound smarter? Smarter than what? Than quoting Rocky and Bullwinkle, for instance? Careful. I'm a big fan of Moose and Squirtle. Still, I take your point. There are a lot of things to quote that don't sound as good as Shakespeare. Almost all of them, in fact. Plus, it shows that you've read him, right? It shows that you're an educated person. Not necessarily. I could have given you Richard III's famous request for a horse since I was 9. My father was a great fan of that play, so I heard that famous line, a horse, my kingdom for a horse," early on. My dad was a factory worker with a high school education. He wasn't particularly interested in impressing anybody with his fancy learning. He was pleased, however, to be able to talk about these great stories, these plays he had read and loved. We loved the plays, the great characters, the fabulous speeches, the witty comebacks. I hope never to be stabbed, but if I am, I'd sure like to be able to answer when somebody asks me if it's bad, "No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough. 'Twill serve," as Mercutio does in Romeo and Juliet. I mean, to be dying and clever at the same time? How can you not love that? Rather than saying that quoting Shakespeare proves you're smart, I think what happens is that writers quote what they've read or heard, and they have more Shakespeare stuck in their heads than anyone else. Except, of course, Bugs Bunny. But there's something else you may not have thought of. Shakespeare is also someone writers can struggle against or bounce their ideas off. It's worth remembering that few writers simply copy bits of Shakespeare's work into their own. More commonly, they take a little from the older work, while also letting their own, newer work have its say. The new writer has his own agenda, his own slant to put on things. In Romeo and Juliet, both the young lovers commit suicide. In West Side Story, Tony is murdered but Maria survives. In Romiette and Julio, both teens live to the end of the book. Each ending says different things about the characters, their families and communities, and their attitudes, and the reader's attitudes toward life and death. Each asks readers to think about what a tragedy is. And each one is even more interesting if you think not just about the modern movie or book, but about the 400-year-old play that inspired it. That's what writers can do with Shakespeare. Of course, they can do it with other writers as well, and they do, but not quite as often. Why? You know why. The stories are great, the characters compelling, the language fabulous. And we know him. You can base your new work on Fulk Greville if you like, but you'd have to provide footnotes. So, what's in it for readers? When we recognize the connections between Shakespeare and something new we are reading, we bring our own knowledge to the story. We become partners with the writer in creating meaning. Even before we start reading, we know some of what the writer wants us to know. For example, that Tony and Maria, or Romiette and Julio, will face danger because of their love for each other. We know it because Shakespeare has already told us. Our understanding of both works becomes richer and deeper when we see the connections between them. We figure out something about the newer work, maybe even see the old one with new eyes. And the writer we know better than any other, the one whose language and whose plays we know even if we haven't read him, the one it's easiest and most rewarding for a writer to use in this way, is Shakespeare. Chapter 7. Or the Bible. Connect these dots. Garden, serpent, plagues, flood, parting of waters, loaves, fishes, 40 days, betrayal, denial, slavery and escape, fatted calves, milk and honey. Ever read a book with all these things in them? Guess what? So have your writers, poets, playwrights, screenwriters. Maybe a writer doesn't need characters, theme, or a plot, but just a title. The Bible is full of possible titles. James Dean starred in the famous movie East of Eden. Why East? Because John Steinbeck, who wrote the story on which the film is based, knew his Genesis. To find yourself east of Eden is to be outside of the garden in a fallen world. Which is the only kind of world we know, and certainly the only kind there could be in a James Dean movie. William Faulkner has Absalom, Absalom, 1936, and Go Down Moses, 1942. Okay, that last one's from a spiritual, but the song itself is about a biblical story. Suppose you want to write about one sister who can't seem to win any love or recognition from her family, and another sister everyone adores. You might turn to a biblical story of two brothers and call your book Jacob Have I Loved, 1981, as Catherine Patterson did. Poetry is absolutely full of scripture. John Milton took most of his subjects from you-know-where. Paradise Lost, 1667, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonistes, both 1671. Those questing knights in the anonymous late 14th century Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, 1590 to 1596, are searching on behalf of their religion, whether they know it or not, and they usually do know. Even Geoffrey Chaucer's Pilgrims in the Canterbury Tales, 1384, are making an Easter pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. Neither they nor their tales are particularly holy, but much of their talk involves the Bible and religious teachings. Some serious Bible stories turn comic in the hands of a modern writer. In Eudora Welty's story Why I Live at the P.O., 1941, the narrator is in the grips of sibling rivalry. Her younger sister has just arrived back in her family's town, daughter in tow. The narrator is outraged because she has to cook 2 chickens to feed 5 grown-ups and a small child just because her spoiled younger sister has come home. What sister can't see, but we can, is that those 2 birds are really a fatted calf. It may not be the grandest feast ever cooked, but it definitely is a feast, and a feast is what you have to have when the prodigal son comes home, even if the prodigal son turns out to be a daughter. Okay, so there are a lot of ways the Bible shows up, but isn't that a problem for anyone who isn't exactly a Bible scholar? Well, I'm not. But even I can sometimes recognize when a writer is making use of something from the Bible. Here's how it works. 4 children make their way through a mysterious wardrobe into a magical land. This land is in the grip of perpetual winter and ruled by a cruel and selfish witch. But there is hope that a savior will come, hope that these 4 children will somehow bring that savior to this frozen wasteland. This might seem like the setup for many a fantasy novel. Children often make journeys to fantastic magical places. There are often evil witches or other villains who need to be defeated. But when one of the children gives in to temptation and betrays the others to the witch, and when the Savior offers his own life in return for the life of the traitor, and when 2 of the children stay awake to talk with the Savior on the night before his death, you can start to see some parallels to the Bible, can't you? And when the Savior is actually killed and then comes back to life, you know we're not just talking about Narnia, right? You can read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, 1950, simply as a riveting adventure. But you can also notice the way C.S. Lewis uses Edmund's betrayal to parallel that of Judas, and Aslan's sacrifice to parallel that of Christ. And if you do, the story picks up added weight and meaning. Then The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe doesn't simply exist in a far-off fairy tale world. Its story becomes timeless, speaking of the pain and grief and guilt and forgiveness and hope that human beings everywhere have always lived with. And that is a story that never grows old. C.S. Lewis isn't the only writer who decided to create a character whose life looks a lot like Jesus's. Although as far as I know, he is the only one who made that character a lion. A fictional character like Aslan, whose story parallels that of Jesus, is called a Christ figure. If you have your eye out for Christ figures in your reading, this list may be helpful. 1. Crucified, wounds in the hands, feet, side, and head. 2. In agony. 3. Self-sacrificing. 4. Good with children. 5. Good with loaves of bread, fishes, water, and wine. 6. 33 years old when last seen. 7. Works as a carpenter. 8. Doesn't use fancy modes of transportation, feet or donkeys preferred. 9. Believed to have walked on water. 10. Often seen with arms outstretched. 11. Spends time alone in the wilderness. 12. Tempted by the devil. 13. last seen in the company of thieves. 14, likes to tell stories and parables and uses wise sayings. 15, carried his own cross. 16, dead and buried, but came back to life on the third day. 17, has disciples, 12 at first, although they are not all faithful to him. 18, very forgiving. 19, came to save an unworthy world. This list, of course, doesn't cover everything the Jesus of the Bible ever said or did. That's okay. It's not a list about religious belief. It's a list to help us recognize certain kinds of characters who we might come across in books. Say we're reading a book, a novel, and let's say this novel has a man in it. The man is old, very poor, and his work is humble. He's not a carpenter, but a fisherman. Jesus had some dealings with fishermen too, so there's a point of connection. And the old fisherman hasn't had much good luck for a long time, so no one believes in him. But one young boy does. There are 2 points from our list. The old man is good with children, and he has a disciple. And this old man is very good and pure, so that's another point of connection. Because the world that he lives in isn't quite so good. You could even think of it as fallen. Out fishing by himself, the man hooks a big fish that takes him out far beyond where he's been before, to where the sea becomes a wilderness. He's all alone. He suffers a lot of pain. His hands are ripped up by struggling with the fishing line. He thinks he's broken something in his side. But he encourages himself with wise sayings like, "A man is not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated." The man's struggles with the fish last 3 days. The people left on land think he is dead. His great fish is ruined by sharks, but he manages to drag its skeleton back to the port. When he returns, it's like he's come back to life. He has to walk up a hill from the water to his shack. He carries the mast of his ship, which makes him look like a man carrying a cross. Then he lies on his bed, exhausted. His arms are thrown out to the sides, his hands, hurt and raw, are showing. And the next morning, when everyone sees the skeleton of the giant fish, even the doubters begin to believe in the old man again. He brings a kind of hope to his world. And, yes, did you have a question? Didn't Ernest Hemingway write a book like that? Yes, The Old Man and the Sea, 1952. It's easy to spot that he meant the old man, Santiago, to be a Christ figure. It's not always so simple. Not every Christ figure will have all 19 items on our list. Even Santiago didn't. They don't have to be male, don't have to be human. Think of Aslan. Don't have to be Christian. Don't even have to be good. But if a character is a certain age, does certain things, hands out wine and bread, blesses children, you know what I mean, suffers in certain ways, keep an eye out for those wounds in the hands, feet, and or side, or sacrifices himself or herself or itself for others, that's the big one, then you should pay attention. Why are there Christ figures? The short answer is that the author wants to make a certain point. Perhaps the character's sacrifice will mean more to us if we see it as similar to the greatest sacrifice we know of. Maybe it has to do with saving somebody, or everybody, or hope, or miracles. But count on it, the writer is up to something. Noticing that he's using a character as a Christ figure is one way to start figuring it out. Chapter 8. Hansel D. and Gretel Dumb. By now I've beaten you severely about the head and shoulders with the idea that all literature grows out of other literature. That could include novels, stories, plays, poems, songs, opera, movies, television, commercials, and possibly a variety of electronic media we haven't even seen yet. So let's try being writers for a moment. You want to borrow from some source to add a bit of flesh to the bare bones of your story. Who you gonna call? Actually, Ghostbusters is not a bad answer, for right now anyway. But will people in 100 years know this movie? Maybe not. Something a little more traditional. Homer? Half of the people who hear that name will think of the guy who says, "Do," and not of the guy who wrote the Iliad. Shakespeare, then? He's been the go-to guy for 400 years. But some people think quoting Shakespeare makes you look stuck up or like you're trying too hard. Plus, all the good quotes are already taken. James Joyce? Too complex. T.S. Eliot? He's all quotes from other writers to begin with. It's tough being a writer. What can you find to use that all of your readers will know? Alice in Wonderland, Treasure Island, the Narnia novels, The Cat in the Hat, Goodnight Moon. We may not all know Shylock. He's from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, by the way. But we all know Sam I Am. Fairy tales, too. Snow White, Sleeping Beauty. So if you're a writer and you want to use a fairy tale, what do? You might decide to tell the whole story just as your readers know it, only more thoughtfully and deeply than a brief fairy tale can manage. So you expand it into a novel. Robin McKinley did this to Beauty and the Beast when she wrote Beauty, 1978. Or you could shake things around. Perhaps give us Hansel and Gretel from the point of view of the witch, who was living peacefully enough in her gingerbread cottage before two brats started nibbling on the window frames. Or Morgan Le Fay's side of the King Arthur legend, as Marion Zimmer Bradley did with The Mists of Avalon, 1982. Or you might change the time and the setting. Frances Hodgson Burnett took Cinderella into Victorian London and gave us A Little Princess, 1905. You, the writer, can pick and choose, deciding what you're going to keep of the old story and what you're going to let go. Frances Hodgson Burnett certainly did. She kept the good and lovely little girl. Sarah doesn't think she's pretty, but other people do, whose mother is dead. She kept the mean stepmother. Well, almost. Sarah's father doesn't get married a second time, but he does send Sarah to a boarding school where Miss Minchin, the headmistress, is as cruel as any wicked stepmother right out of the Brothers Grimm. Once Sarah's father dies and Sarah is left penniless, Miss Minchin makes Sarah slave in the kitchen, trudge out into stormy weather on errands, and sleep in a freezing attic full of rats. Burnett kept the stepsisters, but changed them. Sarah's two close friends at school are not wicked in the least, but they can't help Sarah much without bringing Miss Minchin's wrath down on their heads. And they are spoiled, at least compared to Sarah. They get enough to eat, warm clothes to wear, and an education. Sarah gets none of these things. Burnett didn't need the ball. She had no use for the glass slipper or for Prince Charming, but she kept the fairy godmother, again with her own twist. A kind neighbor takes pity on Sarah and sends her things. New clothes, warm blankets, delicious food, books to read, in such a secret and mysterious way that it seems like magic. In the end, it turns out that this kind neighbor is in fact Sarah's guardian, a combination of a fairy godfather and a new father to make up for the one she lost. Sarah goes to live a life of riches and luxury with him. A happy ending, just like every fairy tale should have. Burnett used several pieces of the Cinderella story to create her novel. You, as the writer, don't have to. Maybe you only want the glass slipper, and it isn't even glass, it's a Nike running shoe. Maybe you just want a trail of breadcrumbs or a sleeper wakened by a kiss. You can bring the whole story to your readers' minds with just one small detail. Why? Because fairy tales and legends, like Shakespeare and the Bible, and all other writing and telling, belong to the one big story. And also because, since we were old enough to be read to or to be propped up in front of a television, we've been living on that story. As readers, we want something new in our stories, but we want familiarity, too. We want a new novel to be not quite like anything we've read before. At the same time, we want it to be enough like stories we already know that we can use those stories to make sense of it. If a book manages both things at once, newness and familiarity, it creates a harmony, a new tune that sings along with the melody of the main story. And those harmonies are where a sense of depth comes from. Those harmonies may come from the Bible or from Shakespeare or from humbler, more familiar stories. So the next time you go to the bookstore and carry home a new novel, don't forget your Brothers Grimm. Chapter 9. It's Greek to me. In these last 3 chapters, we've talked about 3 sorts of myths: Shakespearean, biblical, and folk or fairy tales. The connection between the Bible, or religion in general, and myth sometimes causes trouble. If you take myth to mean untrue, you're going to be upset if somebody calls any part of religion a myth. But that's not what I mean by myth. When I say myth, I mean something that helps explain us to ourselves in ways that physics, philosophy, mathematics, chemistry can't. That explanation takes the form of stories that are a part of our group memory, things that everybody knows. These stories shape our culture, the way we live, and, in turn, the stories are shaped and changed by the lives we lead. They become a way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. Let's say it this way. Myth is a body of story that matters. Every community has its own body of story that matters. In European and European American cultures, of course, there's a source for myth that almost everyone will recognize. When most of us think of myth, we think of Greece and Rome. You don't believe me? In the town where I live, the sports teams at the college are the Spartans. Our high school teams are the Trojans. In my state, we have a Troy, an Ithaca, a Sparta, a Romulus, a Remus, and a Rome. Now, if a town in the middle of Michigan can be called Ithaca, it suggests that Greek myths have some pretty good staying power. Rick Riordan certainly thought so when he made his hero the son of a Greek god. Wading into The Lightning Thief, 2005, you'll run into not just Percy's dad, Poseidon, but Zeus and Athena and Hades and the whole crowd on Mount Olympus. You'll also find more than a bit of Greek myth hiding inside J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, 1998. What guards the entrance to the place where the stone has been hidden? That's right, a 3-headed dog. Any other 3-headed dogs you know of? If you've read any Greek myths, you might remember that the underworld is guarded by a 3-headed dog named Cerberus. Only one living person ever got past Cerberus. His name was Orpheus, and he was the greatest musician of his time. He soothed Cerberus to sleep with his lyre. That's a bit like a harp, if you're interested, and went on to rescue his beloved Eurydice from the land of the dead. Or he tried to. Things didn't quite go as planned. But his story was there for J.K. Rowling when Harry and his friends needed to get past Fluffy. Other myths stay in our minds as well, like Icarus. I'm always a bit surprised, though, that Icarus gets all the attention. It was his father, Daedalus, who built the wings. The myth tells how Daedalus and Icarus have been imprisoned in a giant maze, the labyrinth, which ironically Daedalus himself built. They know there is no way to escape by land or sea, so Daedalus builds for himself and his son 2 sets of wings made of reeds and wax. Daedalus flies safely to the mainland, but Icarus is too thrilled at the feel of flight to listen to his father's warnings. He flies higher and higher and higher until the sun melts the wax in his wings. He falls, drowning in the sea. The fall of Icarus remains deeply fascinating for us. We can see so much in it. There's the attempt of a parent to save a child and the grief of having failed. The solution that is as deadly as or worse than the problem it was trying to fix. The passion and enthusiasm that leads to self-destruction. The clash between the sober wisdom of adulthood and the recklessness of youth. And the terror involved in that headlong fall to the sea. It's a story that is so deeply part of our thinking that it comes to the reader's mind unbidden whenever somebody in a book flies or falls. In 1558, Peter Bruegel painted a wonderful picture, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. Right at the front of the picture we can see a plowman with his ox. Just beyond him is a shepherd and his flock. At sea, A merchant ship sails calmly along. This is a scene of everyday activity. Everything is calm and ordinary, except in the lower right corner of the painting, where you can see a pair of legs just about to disappear into the water. That's our boy. He really doesn't have much of a presence in the picture, but he still makes all the difference. Without those legs, without the sense of sadness and pity and helplessness they bring to the viewer, this is just a picture of farming and sailing without much to say for itself. There are two great poems based on this piece of art. One is W. H. Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts, 1940, and the other is William Carlos Williams's Landscape with the Fall of Icarus, 1960. They're wonderful poems, each different from the other in tone, style, and form. But each has something to say about how the world goes on, even in the face of our private tragedies. Williams's poem talks about the visual elements of the painting, trying to capture the scene while sneaking in something about the theme. Even the way the poem looks on the page, tall and narrow, makes a reader think of the body plummeting from the sky. According to Bruegel, when Icarus fell, it was spring. A farmer was plowing his field, the whole pageantry of the year was awake, tingling near the edge of the sea, concerned with itself, sweating in the sun that melted the wing's wax. Unsignificantly off the coast, there was a splash quite unnoticed. This was Icarus drowning. Auden's poem, on the other hand, is a meditation on what suffering is, and why the outside world takes no interest in our private disasters. About suffering, they were never wrong. The old masters, how well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. It is astonishing and pleasing that the same painting can bring forth these two very different responses. Still, it all goes back to the myth: the boy, the wings, the unscheduled dive. Greek and Roman myths, of course, are much more than Icarus. There are stories of doomed and desperate families. Oedipus, anyone? Bold searchers after treasure, Jason and the Argonauts. Wronged women, violent in their grief and madness. Would you like Aeneas and Dido or Jason and Medea? There are stories of heroes, many of them the sons and daughters of gods, but these heroes did not always act in ways that are particularly divine. Take the Iliad. Many people assume that the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War, the war between the Greeks and the Trojans. It's not, though. It's the story of the wrath of Achilles. In other words, the story of how Achilles got really mad and what happened afterward. Achilles becomes angry with his leader Agamemnon and decides to sit out the war. He refuses to fight until his best friend is killed by the Trojans. At this point, he turns his anger against the Trojans' greatest hero, Hector. In the end, Achilles kills Hector, and the Greeks win the war. Oh, the reason Achilles got so mad? Agamemnon took away his war prize, something Achilles himself had stolen from the Trojans. Pretty trivial, right? It gets worse. The prize is a woman. What Agamemnon takes away from Achilles is his slave, the woman he kidnapped. Is that noble? Hardly. And yet, somehow, this story has come to stand for ideals of heroism and loyalty, sacrifice and loss. Later in the Odyssey, Homer gave us the trials and struggles of another hero, Odysseus, as he tries to make his way home from the Trojan War. It's not easy. It takes him 10 years. And his wife Penelope waits for him all that time. Other writers don't always have their characters sulking when their kidnapped women are taken away from them, fighting bloody duels on the battlefield or waiting a decade for their husbands to show up, but they do often show characters acting out of the same needs, desires, and patterns. The need to protect one's family, Hector. The need to maintain one's dignity, Achilles. The fight to return home, Odysseus. The determination to remain faithful and to keep hope alive, Penelope. In two stories about legendary heroes behaving in very human ways, Homer gives us the four great struggles of the human being. No wonder so many writers have often borrowed from and imitated Homer and the other tales of Greek and Roman mythology. Writers and readers share knowledge of these stories, this mythology, so when writers use it, we recognize it. Sometimes we understand exactly what the writer meant. Sometimes we only get a hint. Still, that recognition makes our experience of literature richer, deeper, more meaningful, so our own modern stories also matter. They also share in the power of myth.